The history of forest inventory in the United States dates back to 1928, when two congressmen felt that it would be desirable for the U.S. to maintain their forest resources and not run into shortages as had happened in Europe. So they passed a law that essentially mandated that the U.S. Forest Service inventory their forest lands every 10 years and report to Congress on the status of those lands. They were concerned about the amount of timber that was available for mercantile markets and about the number of acres that were available for forest management. At that time, the U.S. was in a very large expansion program, and there was acres being gobbled up by urban development and agricultural purposes. Also, we were cutting off a good chunk of lumber, and we were having forest fires and insect problems and so on. So Congress wanted to know how many board feet of lumber were out there, how fast it was growing, how fast it was being cut up, how fast insects were gobbling it up, how fast it was being replanted, and in general, just what the status of the land was and the changes over time. So starting in 1928, the U.S. Forest Service started putting inventories out on their national forest to inventory the forest lands. This continued until 1956, when the laws were modified to include the territories, at which time Puerto Rico, Alaska, and Hawaii were also incorporated into the inventory plan. Things went well until the mid-70s, when the environmental movement became popular in the United States. Suddenly it became obvious that maybe knowing something about the forest resources on national forests was not enough. We needed to know more about all the renewable resources on all the lands. So Congress at that time passed a whole series of laws that affected the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, Soil Conservation Service, all of the federal agencies essentially. And the laws essentially said, inventory the renewable resources, not just the tree resources, and report to Congress on the status of these lands every 10 years. Our job is to inventory the resources of Alaska, and we look at the rangelands, grasslands, herbaceous lands, shrublands, timberlands. We look at all ownerships. It doesn't matter if it's federal, state, native corporation, or private. Our job is to simply find out what's out there, describe it, go back periodically and re-inventory it, and note the changes.
In Alaska, vegetation inventory takes a style all its own. The immensity and remoteness of the area makes the task difficult, to say the least. Since overland travel throughout interior Alaska is only possible during the winter months, when the soil is frozen and the vegetation is not visible, helicopter transport is necessary to fly inventory crews into their plots.
Helicopters and field camps in the interior of Alaska are the only way to go, and they're very expensive, mainly because of the problem of getting supplies in. You have to fly crews in, and fly in camping gear, fly in helicopter fuel, and that helicopter burns a lot of fuel, 30 gallons per hour on the average. So for every day that we run 3.5 hours a day, you're looking at 90, 120 gallons of fuel just to keep that baby in the air. That means about 2.5 drums to 3 drums of fuel a day that helicopter burns that we have to transport out into the boondocks.
Southeast and coastal Alaska present a host of logistic problems for inventory. Much of the land is composed of remote coastal islands with steep terrain, which are subject to heavy rainfall. The solution to the problem has been a unique innovation, a floating base camp. In this case, a boat which sleeps 20 and comes complete with its own helicopter.
At about 7, we go into the galley for breakfast. That usually takes 20 minutes to a half an hour, depending on the day. Then we come out, organize our packs, make sure that we have everything that we need for the day, check through the photos to make sure that we know where we're going to land with the helicopter so that when we get up there, we don't waste a lot of extra time trying to locate it. Then we pretty much just make sure that we have everything, get our goshawk collars, get our GPS units, make sure we have all the extra batteries and everything that we'll need. Then we're on standby until we go out, 1st through 4th. Take off in the helicopter, locate our plots using the aerial photos. Once we get to our plot, we find a reference point, which we've also located from the air.
Once on the ground, the photos are again consulted to determine the best route to the plot. After chaining into the plot, the inventory process begins. Using a global position satellite receiver, their location can be pinpointed for future reference. Trees are measured for size, quality, and quantity. Increment borers are used to extract cores to determine the age and growth rate. All measurement information is entered into a small handheld computer.
Radio growth on that other tree. Tree number 10.
Soil types are also described and recorded. Ground cover is identified and recorded as well as down trees.
I do the vegetation work on my plots, or on our locations. So I divide the understory vegetation, actually up through the canopy, into layers. Usually distinct layers, about a 2 decimeter for the ground cover, and then the 2 decimeter layer with all the forbs, a shrub layer, and then up into the canopy. And then I determine the percent cover of each of those plants that I've found.
Part of the inventory includes trying to locate goshawk nests by playing the recording of a goshawk. The entire inventory process takes a 2-person crew approximately 11 hours, depending on the accessibility and the steepness of the terrain. When crews return to the boat or field camp at the end of the day, their job is not over. Information must be downloaded from their handheld computers to a PC on the boat, and then checked for accuracy. Tree cores are measured with the help of a microscope. Wet gear is dried in the engine room, and packs are prepared for the next morning. Some evenings, there's time for a game of cribbage. And, on rare occasions, the boat comes into a local port.
The boat we have on contract right now will sleep 20 people. It comes with a crew of 5, including a skipper, engineer, a deckhand who's also a helicopter mechanic, a cook, and a helicopter pilot. And while a boat is not cheap on a daily basis, the ability of it to move around quickly, transporting crews, supplies, helicopter, and fuel to our locations really pays off in the long run. We're putting in some of the lowest cost plots we've ever inventoried in the state of Alaska, here in the southeast area, largely because of the use of this boat. If you've ever worked in southeast Alaska or any rainforest area, you would quickly realize how difficult it can be to stay dry. Coming in from the field after a rainy day, your gear is wet, you're living in a tent, your sleeping bag is damp, you're cooking meals that are somewhat well prepared, mediocre, whatever. With this system we have working here, our crews come home to well prepared meals, dry beds, and hot showers. It makes a heck of a big difference.
All of the collected inventory information is sent on to the Forestry Sciences Lab in Anchorage, where the data is compiled and used for a variety of purposes.
We plan to use inventory data in a totally integrated form for land management planning, for wildlife biology, habitat assessment, or biomass assessments, change detection, and any use of vegetation data that people might come up with in the future.
Considering the size and the remoteness of much of Alaska, not all data is collected from ground surveys. Some information is taken from a process called remote sensing.
Remote sensing. Why do we use remote sensing to look at trees and natural resources? In essence, the reason we do it is to save money while maintaining the same level of accuracy that we would have if we did it all on the ground. To measure trees all over the state of Alaska would take, and does take, an immense amount of time and money, but we reduce it by using photographs, doing a lot of the work in the office, and then going out and subsampling on the ground, and using the information we collect on the ground to expand to what we have already determined from the photography. And one of the complaints of local area managers has been that the satellite imagery is very, very difficult to use. They can't see things that they're used to seeing. So what we've done is fused the satellite imagery with the orthophotography and produced an image that gives both the classification data and the textural information from the ortho photograph. This can be done in an office off of a simple desktop computer printed to a color plotter. You can laminate this information, or laminate these sheets, and actually take it off to the field, and it's spatially correct so that you know the scale, you know the correct azimuth, and you can use the information in the field. Like, you can go to specific classes on here because you can see the roads now. In the past, you couldn't see the road, so you wouldn't really be able to tell where you were. Now, with this fused data, you can see the roads, you can see the classes, you can actually go to these locations, and people are finding it fairly useful.
The data that is collected from both the field inventories and remote sensing is entered into a database where it is compiled and used to provide information to Congress, land managers, and the public. The many reports that are created from this information are used to help in making decisions regarding the management of our lands. Information such as the volume of the timber resource, the health of a forest, the accessibility of the resource, vegetation growth rates, and many other types of information all can help in the decision-making process. The data is also used in cooperative research efforts with universities and other agencies, and also to provide information for specific research projects. Remote sensing information is used to provide both satellite images and maps of the resource areas. In Alaska, vegetation inventory takes a style all its own. The immensity and remoteness of the last frontier has presented many challenges. One of these challenges has been met with the unique combination of the helicopter and the floating base camp, providing a cost-effective way of transporting inventory crews to their work sites and also providing a comfortable living environment in the field.